Got it. Okay, so as I was saying, I think most of you were already here for that. But welcome to the ARIS October office hours, using broader impacts to reduce the impacts of climate change. We have some great speakers here today to lead our discussion. The first duo I'll go with are Allison Meadow and Gigi Owen from the University of Arizona. They have been ARIS fellows for us and have finished up their fellowship program and provided a product that's very relevant to today's topic. And then our third speaker today is Joe Witte, and he is from the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California. And he does a lot of outreach to meteorologists and getting meteorologists on the news, the information that they're developing from the Jet Propulsion Lab. Hopefully that's kind of accurate. All right, so I will turn it over to Gigi and Allison, I think, to start.
Cool, thanks. We have just a couple of slides, nothing formal. We're not gonna hopefully bore you to death with all of this, but we thought it would be helpful to have just a few so that we could kind of introduce the program and the kind of work that we do. So hi, everyone. First, I'm Allison Meadow. I'm at University of Arizona in something called the Arizona Institutes for Resilience. And I work with a couple of different climate research programs there. Today, we're going to talk mostly about the work that Gigi and I share with a program called Climate Assessment for the Southwest, which is funded by NOAA and is 20-some years old. And we're in the middle of writing our rebid proposal for that to get another 5 years of funding. So keep your fingers crossed that all goes smoothly. I'm a social scientist who came to this work in climate adaptation through my PhD, which was at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I got really interested in the role that social science can play, particularly in helping the climate science get connected with decision making. So that's sort of how I came to this, and this idea of what we're now calling, like broader impacts and societal impacts of how do we make sure that the science really is useful in decision making in the world. Gigi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Gigi Owen. I am a research scientist with CLIMAS. I've been there since 2008. And my background is also in social science, some applied anthropology, and then also geography, and kind of coming at it from like a political ecology approach. I came into kind of looking at broader impacts work as I developed the CLIMAS program evaluation, which we kind of started looking at in the early, 2008, 2009, 2010, and didn't have a lot of guidance about how to understand the impacts of research, even though our entire program was really predicated on having an impact, but there just wasn't a lot of guidance about how to really do that in an effective way and then evaluate what that impact looked like in society. So yes, over the past several years, it's kind of taken shape and is now really helped Allison and I put together this guidebook, and has helped us kind of think about how to talk about this with other researchers who want to do this work.
Cool. Okay. So we'll give you just a quick background. So Gigi and I both mentioned this program CLIMAS, Climate Assessment for the Southwest, that we're both affiliated with. This is funded by NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the mission of CLIMAS and its 10 other sister programs around the country is to link climate science, so climate change and climate variability directly to decision-making, policy-making, resource management. Whoever needs to use this science, we want to really make sure that it is usable, that it's in a format that's usable, it's understandable, and it can be tied directly to decision-making. So our mission is to work to improve the ability of the region's social and ecological systems to respond to and thrive in a variable and changing climate. And we really do this a lot through a term that we've sort of adopted is the idea of like engaged scholarship. So this is, we do our research, but we do our research in close partnership with decision makers, right from community level, neighborhood level, all the way up to elected officials and everybody in between. Private sector, public sector, we sort of have an open door policy. You need climate science and you need advice about what's happening in this region, we're going to try to work with you on that through a number of things. So we just wanted to illustrate that a little bit because I think it's this engaged scholarship approach is like a little bit different from that classic NSF definition of broader impact. So we thought we'd just provide a couple of examples of what we mean when we say engaged scholarship and kind of our version of broader impacts. So this is a project that I worked on a few years ago, drought monitoring on the Hopi Reservation. The Hopi Reservation is in the Four Corners region of the Southwest. It's a part of an extremely large area. I believe it's the size of Connecticut, the whole Four Corners, but with really sparse monitoring of climate and weather data. There's really just a handful of weather stations across this incredibly vast landscape. So the Hopi Department of Natural Resources approached CLEMAS with questions about, okay, how we know we have a drought. We know it's not really being captured properly by the sort of official drought monitoring systems. And it affects the amount of aid and it affects the decisions that they can make if they don't really have a proper record of drought. So they came and said, how can we be doing this better? How can we keep decision makers at local level better informed, and also it has implications for things like USDA aid for farmers and ranchers. So we worked with them. I mean, there was like, okay, well, can we just get more weather stations? That wasn't really a viable option. So we worked really closely through just regular trips up there and a lot of time from this picture, out on the landscape, but also just in conference rooms and digging through old documents, talking with folks to figure out how can we help them construct an on-the-ground drought monitoring protocol that actually makes sense for the kinds of decisions that they make. Not too expensive, doesn't require a lot of equipment, and really draws on the expertise that folks already have and can be sort of recorded in a more systematic way that just helps inform those decisions. So that's that's one of our engaged, out there, like, okay, let's work together. Let's figure out a system that works for everybody. And it's being used. It's we're still in touch. Folks still call CLEMAS. And so we know we've made some progress there. Another end of the spectrum is what it takes to get some of this going. And this was another project I got to be involved in. And it was really fun because it involved viticulture and wine. The Arizona wine industry is actually taking off, where it's growing incredibly rapidly. But there are these big questions about how climate change might affect the industry, because these are really long-term investments once you start planting wine vines. So one of the climatologists with CLEMAS started working with the wine grape growers, but he didn't know any of them to begin with. So a lot of this project was, how are we going to get out there and just start meeting with folks? How are we going to build the network that it takes so that we make sure we're getting the right questions from them and can make sure that we're getting the right data and information back out to the growers. So this was like setting up lots of meetings, being willing to just go out and walk through vineyards with people. Eventually we came to the idea, because we got some thoughts, and this is one of these meetings, was a year in review workshop. So we invited wine grape growers in various parts of the state to get together for a day and really just provided a forum for them to talk through what they had seen over the last year, what similarities between this year and past years. and use that as a way to really kind of understand what are your data needs, how can the university, how can CLIMAS in particular be helpful to you. So just that process of growing the networks that we need.
And a third example comes from Tucson Electric Power, which is the main utility company here in Tucson. And they sought help from CLIMAS scientists when they were looking to assess ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by shifting their energy portfolio. And this had stemmed from a partnership that had like a few, maybe about 3-year partnership of collaboration around getting to know each other, and that they had kind of ended that research a year before, and then CLIMAS or TEP kind of sought out additional help from researchers that they had been working with prior. So the CLIMAS research and TEP team kind of developed a process to compare energy resource portfolios that were based on their relative contributions to warming. And then the utility company was able to better communicate the reasons behind their portfolio decisions to their larger stakeholder network and to their advisors. And in this case, their decision really went beyond the typical default metric of simple cost, which is what these decisions had usually come down to prior. And so then the utility company's integrated resource plan, which they publish every year, they published this one last summer, reflected a much more aggressive reductions target than prior plans to help mitigate emissions. So we created this guidebook as one tool to help climate researchers get more comfortable doing engaged research and to help them generate the data about what works to change policies and actions and attitudes. So, thinking about that, if we evaluate how and why our research makes an impact, we can much more quickly act to reduce climate impacts. Which is important because as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has declared, it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. And human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. So when we think about climate change impacts, we really need to know what works to reduce them through adaptation and greenhouse gas reductions, and as soon as possible. So we were working to kind of scale up the use of our guidebook within our department, the Arizona Institutes for Resilience, and which houses a number of climate and environmental research programs on campus. And then we're also starting to collaborate with colleagues across the University of Arizona to design a research impacts framework that kind of really encourages disciplines to take on engaged scholarship focused on societal impact. So that's beyond kind of climate research, but really looking at how the societal impact framework can be can help address all kinds of global issues. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, so this is a really quick kind of rundown on, as Gigi and I said, we've been in our various programs doing a lot of evaluation and a lot of work with our colleagues. So a quick rundown on what works when we talk about engaged scholarship and sort of generating these broader and societal impacts. We really like to focus on meaningful engagement, genuine partnerships between researchers and our societal partners. This isn't us handing off information. This is respecting that our partners bring knowledge and expertise to the table, and without them, we don't come out with anything useful. It has to be a partnership, and we have to sort of co-produce, or this idea of transdisciplinary research, where we blend our various expertise and come up with something unique that's actually useful. Questions that come from stakeholders or our societal partners are more helpful than when we come up with them, make them up out of thin air. An attitude of respect for that practical knowledge, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge. Folks have expertise that we don't. we need to come in with that attitude. Showing up and staying in touch. So being there, obviously the last couple of years, it's been a little rough to be there in person, but we do our best. And if you've got some partnerships established, it's not impossible to do. By Zoom, and then staying in touch, being willing to stay in touch after a project has ended and your funding has gone. Find some way to just, get on a call now and then, do some emails. Analyses that are focused on decision scale. So one of the things that we struggle with is let's making the climate science scaled correctly so that it sort of makes sense to people and it clicks with them. And it makes sense, whether that's county level or whatever scale of a plan they happen to be working on. If we can provide information that kind of makes sense to them at that scale, it helps integrate better. Outputs that are really designed for partners. We all need to publish, that goes without saying, but can we also come up with an output that actually works for our partners, that is not just a published research paper? Would that this happened all the time. Funding mechanisms that really support this kind of work. And we are fortunate, we are very fortunate to work in a program that really does respect this. And those are starting to grow, but the more that we can advocate for mechanisms that respect the fact that we need to travel and we need to be there in person and we need our person time to just spend with our partners. The more we can do that, the better we're going to be. So just finally, we just wanted to first get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And because I think we've got folks from all over the country, we just wanted to let you know that, CLIMAS is one of 11 RISA teams, Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments around the country. So if you go look them up, you will probably find one that covers your region. The U.S. Geological Survey, Climate Adaptation Science Centers have 9 regional centers around the country. Same thing. They're a little more focused on sort of fish and wildlife and Department of Interior. But if that's something that you're interested in, find the center that's near you. And same thing if agriculture is your interest. USDA Climate Hubs has 10 centers around the country. So there's lots of opportunities to connect with these programs that are focused on climate science for decision making. And with that, we'll stop. Oh, and I see Sarah has weighed in with Arizona wine. It is excellent, and I'm honored to be part of helping to sustain it in the long term.
Cheers.
I was going to jump in and ask a question. I know one topic that's often brought up is the idea of the power imbalance. You've got the big, strong University of Arizona or wherever you're working at, and then you're trying to partner with someone else. What are your suggestions about, especially when you're initially starting those partnerships, how do you keep that power imbalance in check, especially when one organization is probably going to be the one bringing in the money, and then it's going to be maybe distributed to the other ones. So you can't necessarily have everyone at the table from the very first second.
PG, you want to start?
Sure. I think that's one thing we've found is it's really, it's why like the building of relationships is so important, and just, kind of being like 2 people or multiple people getting together and like talking about things as people, and first, and then kind of bringing in and like, yes, we're from this university, or yes, we're from this agency, or things like that. And then I think the second thing that first comes to mind is just coming into the partnership or into that kind of like relationship building with respect for everyone, like people's experiences and the knowledge that they have and their expertise, and just kind of coming in as like, here's this situation, what piece of this can research or science offer as one piece of multiple pieces that are needed to kind of like solve the problem. So kind of coming at it with that attitude, I think is really helpful, instead of like, we're the scientists. We know things, we know these facts, and here's what we have to tell you. I think that doesn't often work, especially when you're trying to build partnerships.
Yeah, I'll add on a very sort of, tactical front maybe, and I don't mean it that way, because obviously I'm very committed to partnerships and stuff, but to the extent that we can make sure, especially like Gigi said, at the beginning of those partnerships, like maybe before we really have something established, making sure that the research, because you're right, like we're often the ones that, get the money from the feds, that our outputs are genuinely useful to whoever we're partnering with, so that they really feel like if they're kind of giving of their time, that they're at least walking away with something really tangible that they can point to that's like, oh, this is actually really useful. Like, so an example from the wine project was we had some funding, and we heard from the wine grape growers that one of the things that they never get to do is get everybody in a particular area together to compare notes and just learn from each other. And we were like, hey, we have some money for participant support. We could do that. We could facilitate that. We're going to, as part of that, we're going to bring in some of the climate science, and we're going to kind of introduce that. But just, we were able to help create a space for them to do something that they wanted to do anyway. So that was great. And it wasn't terribly expensive. It just took a lot of our time, but kind of thinking that one step ahead and using this idea of kind of reciprocity. What, we're asking people to give their time. What are we making sure we give back that they can really, that really answers their need to the best of our ability? Jory, did you have your hand up? It went away, but.
I did. I got tired of holding it up virtually. My arm got sore. Yeah, I was just, thank you for sharing the resources and taking us through that. And I know that you developed some resources as part of an ARIS fellowship. I guess my question is, there are people who are doing climate research who are not funded by the NSF, obviously. And so the easy selling point for people who are NSF funded to do this community engaged work is that it addresses the broader impacts criterion. But how do you sell people on the value and the importance of doing this if broader impacts isn't compelling them to do it? And could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so all three of those programs that we listed, NOAA, RISA, the USGS adaptation science centers, and the hubs, are federally funded programs. They don't use the term broader impacts, but they are requiring us to demonstrate that we have real world impacts in some way. So that part is built in. Other than that, we are trying to demonstrate to people how wonderful this world of broader impacts is. I mean, outside of a funding mechanism, we've been talking with folks at Arizona and more broadly about how we can, how having like a little case study of your own research can be helpful, and no matter where you're applying for funding, because you have a nice sort of write-up of like, I have real world impact. Talking with folks about how this can be used in performance reviews and promotion and tenure, how it can be used in your own sort of communication and outreach. If you can show that you're having really positive impacts in your community, that's a great talking point. That's a great, that's a great way for you to sort of connect with people. So trying to connect on a few different levels. I feel like I cut you off, Gigi, because I think you had a good idea.
No, I keep wanting to jump in. Well, no, I think, so one thing that I'm seeing is that there's a real, I think, like kind of the next generation of scientists are like wanting, like they want their work to have an impact. I see that in like all the graduate students that I know and work with, definitely with undergrads. I mean, I think especially with climate, I mean, that's their future. And so I think more and more people are wanting to do this work. And so a lot of I think that they want to know how to do this work, but I think a lot of the training that we need to do and the motivations that we need to really focus on are looking at the motivations of like the current generation of researchers and, you know, and like climate adaptation professionals. And because I think that it has mostly been driven by funding and promotion and tenure. So kind of helping to change the structure of universities and of funding calls beyond NSF, I think is really important, because it will lay the foundations that make doing this kind of research easier. But I think just every student I talk to is like, I want my research to make a difference. So I think that is a real reason to bring this out beyond NSF.
Yeah, I see it all the time with the undergrads and the grad students I teach. But then when the assistant professors come to talk to me about broader impacts, it's all of a sudden they've got, you know, so many other things on their mind and so many things pressing on them. And that's where it becomes much more of a challenge, you know, and that's why the broader impacts mandate is so important, I think. But it's good to hear that the USGS and NOAA and these other agencies are building it in, even if they're not explicitly calling it broader impacts, because, you know, it's not that assistant professors don't want to do this work too. They've got so many other things they're trying to balance it against.
I don't think they're very well supported by the university structure. And so I almost see it as like, really universities need to like help bring this along from, you know, from the administration. It's a big challenge.
Well, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one of the really interesting partnerships here that, well, Jory, you know Kim Patton from Research Development Services here at University of Arizona. And one of the things that's been really interesting is so Research Development Services are the people who help us get grants. And they're becoming really aware of how much societal impacts is built into funding out of Europe and the EU. They want Arizona to be more competitive internationally. And so they're really interested in this. They're really wanting to have Arizona researchers get tuned up on this kind of stuff so that they can kind of make a case for international funding, even as we sort of wait for some more of our US funders to come along on this. But that was really fascinating to see them get really interested in this idea.
Thank you, guys. I wanted to give Joe a minute to talk about his work, because he is not in academia and doesn't really come from an academic background as everyone else or most people here do. And so I think he's going to bring a unique perspective on what he's done.
All right. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here, and great to learn things about what things are happening down at Arizona. So basically, I'm at JPL in the climate.nasa.gov website, which is very similar to the NOAA website, which is climate.gov. Ours is climate.nasa.gov. And so what we do is we produce short videos and short stories with the news releases that go with the publications in peer-reviewed journals. And so my job here is to get those stories out to the TV forecasters and on a real-time basis, so that is news or breaking news sometimes. For instance, Arctic sea ice has just maxed out at September 20th, and here what the numbers are, and here's a short visualization. This is really a spin-off on a project that we started in 2007. As we all know, this climate communication is a marathon, not a sprint. And you're talking about how do we find partners to develop our program. I was really lucky because in 2007, after 4 decades in TV broadcasting, I looked at what the networks did on that Friday night in February 2007 about the IPCC report. And basically, they talked about the ice melting in the Arctic and what was happening in Africa and what was happening with the Amazon forest, all very big, important, critical stories. But this is American television talking to American viewers. There was nothing local about it. And as we all know, you got to get that down to the local area. And what I like about NOAA Education's publication last summer about the theory of changes, they really highlight and describe methods and means of getting things down to the local. And of course, one of the things we've heard today is the importance of listening to our target audience. What is it you want? I'm coming from you, and I have all sorts of information from on high, and this is very useful for you. And that's one of the challenges we have at JPL, is that we're developing means and ways to measure soil moisture and groundwater via satellites, but we need to take that data and transfer it to how can the farmer in the back 40 growing rice in the Central Valley here in California use that data. The data is there, but it needs to be in a simplified form for him to use. And so we face that communication challenge too, is how do we engage those viewers? And basically, a lot of it comes down to what Everett Rogers did way back in the 60s when he developed the theory of the diffusion of innovation. How do we take this innovative idea that we have and get the actual farmers, shall we see as an example? He worked with corn farmers in Iowa, and he was trying to get them to use better corn seeds, but farmers are very conservative. Said, oh no, my grandfather did it this way, I am not interested. So he developed a theory. You've got to find the community leaders, engage them, or he or she, maybe just one, get them involved in the project. And then when his crop produces more bushels per acre than his neighbor starts looking over the fence. Hey, what are you doing differently? So we sort of took this theory. In 2007, I worked for about a year and a half trying to find partners. So I know what finding partners is somewhat like after four decades in TV. And I was lucky enough in 2009 to find Ed Mayback, who does the Six Americas study on climate change with the Yale University and George Mason University. Probably a lot of you know that name quite well. And he was just starting up his program at George Mason. So in a sense, he was looking for projects because he had a new program, graduate program. He had graduate students. He needed projects for his graduate students. And so I pointed out to him, hey, NSF has funds available in informal education. Maybe there's something we can do. And I was fortunate enough also to find out that Ed was there looking for a project for his graduate students. There were funds for NSF. And the other thing was that Ed was such a great organizer of getting partners together that we got NOAA, NASA, the AMS, we got the folks also at Climate Central. And basically we build on Barak Fishoff's model of non-persuasive communication. Let's get the social scientists experts who know how to design messaging for stories. And then let's get the climatologists who do the science, but sometimes have trouble translating to the layman level. And then let's find the communicators who can communicate this. Well, 40 years in broadcasting as a local network forecaster, we knew, and Ed's survey work pointed out that TV forecasters are trusted messengers about science. Not all of them are, some more than others, but in general, out of the 2,000 forecasters across the country, one reason we tune in a particular channel is that I like that weatherman. It may be a liking, it may be a trusting, a combination of the two. So basically, we developed a program with some NSF funds to develop a program that would create a climate change message in just a simple one slide and take about 30 seconds on air for local TV. And then the other bigger part of the program was to start educating the TV forecasters across the country by having workshops at their annual broadcast meeting, and then also having side workshops where we call in about 24 area forecasters. We had one about 8 years ago in Tucson where we had Amber Sullivan bring in some people, and we did a workshop talking there specifically about tree rings, which was really a great story. Now, you may think that a lot of broadcasters, they know weather, but basically until the last 10 years, we didn't have any climatology. I had a climatology class 45 years ago, and we talked about minutia items about climate, much different no greenhouse gas. It was local climate, mountain climate versus desert climate. And so a lot of the forecasters didn't really have a class in college about climate or climate change. And so they didn't really have the background. That was one of our barriers that we found, that, oh, they don't know the science. We might presume they do, but they really didn't. So we had workshops, small and large, giving that. So that was the immediate impact. Let's educate the TV weather forecasters about climate change. Let's bring in some scientists, have talk, and they can talk one-on-one. They can ask their own questions. There's an example of, let's listen to the TV forecasters. What questions do you have? But of course, the side benefit is that hopefully, as they learn more and more about climate, they'd say, oh, this is really important. And one of the great partners we had was, and still have, is Climate Central in Princeton, which develops, basically using NOAA climate data, weekly data about climate, specifically for individual TV markets. For Boston, they have different graphs of what's the temperature range for overnight lows over the past 50 years. What about Phoenix? What about Denver? So each TV forecaster can get his own data for his own area, so it pulls it right down to the local region. So we started with one TV forecaster in 2009, trying to develop this program, an iterative approach of, what do you think? Jim Gandy says, Jim, what about this graphic? What do you think about that? Well, you know, I like this color better than that color. So we tweaked that. And then, so we worked for 2 years with Jim Gandy, made some design changes. And then the next NSF grant came. We worked with 18 TV forecasters in the state of Virginia, different markets, 3 different markets. And we had them all together. This is what we're doing. This is the data to be available. These are the graphics. What kind of graphics do you like? What do you want for your market? And of course, the coast there is more interested in sea level rise, and the folks inland were more interested in the farming aspects for Virginia. So we learned from lessons from them about, oh, what works? What's a challenge for the TV forecasters? And oftentimes we had a big house fire. So my little 30 seconds I was going to get in the weather segment had to be dropped because we were live at a house fire, or we were live at a car chase down the freeway. These little idiosyncratic things that happen in TV news, and it was bang our head. Look at this, is important. So we tried to teach them you can sneak 15 seconds in sometimes. But our next NSF grant 2 years later, we took on the whole country, and with workshops in different areas, fly people in. Fortunately, we had some funding for that, and teach them about climate change, give them a chance to talk to and ask questions of climate meteorologists from various agencies and universities, and they could ask their own questions. And we found some more barriers to behavior of trying to get things on the air. But eventually, so in the diffusion innovation curve, it's sort of like ideally it's a bell curve that starts low, slowly, and then builds up, and bingo. So you get the innovators, oh, wow, this is new. I want to do something new for my viewers. And then a little later on, you get some folks that says, well, my competitor across the street has done that. Or I see at the AMS meeting I went to that the Denver forecaster had success on that. And so we get more and more people. And then, so we started with 1, we had 18, the 3rd and 4th year. And then slowly the curve, you would have thought they would have jumped on this, but they didn't. But last year we had nearly 1,000 TV forecasters. That's 50% of the TV forecasters taking the Wednesday climate data message for their area, for Topeka, for Chicago, for Atlanta. Hey, did you know that the springs have been getting shorter? Or did you know the winter snows? And so Climate Central has gone through all the NOAA data and ground it up, localized the whole thing, and made it presentable on 1 or 2 slides. And you say, well, wow, what are they learning from that? Well, they're getting a quick glimpse, and local news is different than newspapers in that we're mostly headlines with a lot of commercials. But if you look at analyze local news, a lot of the medical and a lot of the science stories are what we call voiceovers, where they anchor, today in science news, man went to the moon. Well, maybe a little, not story that big, but anyway. So he starts reading the little 30-second story. They go to 15 seconds of video, and then they come back to him, and that's the latest in science news. So it's really just a little headline. And part of, in the back of our heads, is that we want the viewers, while they may not take in everything or remember it, they will remember, oh, my forecaster is really concerned about climate change. So maybe I should be a little concerned. Maybe I should pay a little more attention. It's sort of like my doctor is concerned about my heart rate, and so I need to pay attention to it. So it is sort of sometimes an indirect message. And then other times, our forecasters, especially the past 2 years, have done 5-minute segments. Some of them have done hour segments. We had one great television did with their Southwest forecasters, started with the Colorado River in upstate, what is it? Is it Wyoming? I think it is. Through Colorado, all the way down through the Southwest. So they had their different forecasters in the different markets add a little segment about why the Colorado water situation is dire in my farming area or my city area, and put the whole thing together, made a half-hour program out of the whole thing, and shared it with their other stations across the country. Now, sometimes they'll air these on Sunday mornings at 6 o'clock in the morning, but it's there and it's on their website. They can find it. So, and one of the exciting things is you've seen the interest in climate change has gone up dramatically. If you look at Ed and Tony's 6 America survey. So the audience is there, and now NBC network, ABC network, CBS network, and CNN all have started within the last year a climate unit. When I first looked at this idea in 2007, I was like, I'll go to CNN, they'll produce it, and they'll get it out to affiliates. Well, CNN in 2008, during the economic crisis that we had, the economic bubble, closed the science section altogether and let go about 8 people who were working, producers, editors, filmers, and the anchorman. It blew the whole thing away. But now that is coming back. So that's some welcome news. So one of the things I would say, we're making effects in the broader impacts. And so there are forecasters in local markets around talking about climate. They may talk about it on the air, they may talk about it on Facebook or on Twitter or in their public talks. We had one forecast in Philadelphia who would not talk about it on the air. One of the fears TV forecasters have, and more importantly, news management has, is that, oh no, you're going to scare away viewers. You're going to, it's, as we know, highly political, or seems to be, and people are going to turn the dial off. Well, what we found was that, yes, that is true, but we didn't, our TV Mets did not get the reaction that the news directors thought they were going to get. They were not flooded with calls that say, oh, I'm turning you off, I'm leaving the station, I'm going. So, and what we found was people are curious. They want to know, well, what is this about? How does it work? And so these little graphic imagery that we put together helps sort of in a quick little 30-second, it's really a fast soundbite, but it's sort of a way people learn, and they can put it on their Facebook really easy, they can Twitter about it, or they can talk about it at groups. So the one fellow would not talk about climate in Philadelphia during his segment on air, but he talked a whole lot about it when he talked to the local civic groups, or he went to talk to school children. So there are a lot of TV forecasters in all the markets now talking about weather and wanting to talk about the weather. So I encourage you to reach out and find that 1 or 2 broadcaster, maybe in your viewing area, that is talking about climate, and start engaging him. Listen to what he wants. Basically, TV forecasters want a local story that's interesting that nobody's heard about before, and then want some sort of visual. whether it be a farmer or a cow, or whether it be solar panels uniquely installed on a car garage, or what makes this little story unique. So they're out there, and I encourage you to reach out to some of those people, because they're looking for stories. Now, you may not get the long story you want, but it's more top of mind. Is climate top of the mind of the viewers? This is starting to help along that way. And we're all doing as much as we can collectively. And one last thing. So Ed Maybach has taken that project with TV forecasters and taken it now to journalists, print, TV, radio, and they now have 400 journalists who are putting together a program. So in general, that's how we're trying to get those broader impacts. And I think it's beginning to take hold. At least it is in our forecasters, who are beginning to talk about it a whole bunch more. So glad to take any or try to answer any questions you might have.
Joy, I had a question. I'm actually a former TV
Oh.
meteorologist myself. So,
Oh, you are? Wait,
yeah.
where were you?
I was in, well, I'm Mizzou Mafia, and was in Columbia and Des Moines, Iowa, where Allison
really?
is. She was in my viewing
Okay.
area, and La
great.
Crosse, Wisconsin.
Okay.
My
All
question is, when it comes to broader impacts, there's a desire to have assessment and evaluation.
Yes.
And we know that it can be very difficult to assess, especially if the goal of the scientist is learning on the part of the audience.
Oh, yes,
The
right.
TV, we don't know who our viewers are necessarily. We can't necessarily send anything to them to assess. Did you learn from our segment? Because we don't even know necessarily
right.
who's watching. So beyond just giving the viewership numbers from Nelson,
Right.
what methodology have you seen used to actually assess what sort of learning is happening on the viewers of a particular station?
So yes. Ed Maybach has been very keen on trying to answer that question. And as you might suspect, it's really hard to survey the whole country. One of the things we did when we just had one TV meteorologist in one town, way back in 2009, we surveyed the viewers in that market of his station and the other 3 stations to get their level of understanding of climate. And then after a year, when Jim had done his series, Ed surveyed them again. And we found a couple little signs, kind of minute, but there are always different things going on in the news business. IPCC will kick up interest in climate. Did they get this idea about climate from something in their news program, IPCC, or did they get it from a newspaper article or a TV forecast? We don't know, and he's done a recent paper, I'll try to dig it up, about trying to take what has happened in the 6 Americas survey, which is a long 10-year survey, do we see any sign there of increase in understanding the climate that we might be able to relate to the kind of exposure we had? Now, that's not a one-on-one correlation by any means, but he's looked at some of the numbers and has a sense that, yeah, I think there's something here. One thing that we have measured is the understanding of the TV forecasters. When you look specifically at what's the climate education of the TV forecasters, it surveys the forecasters every year. So we have a 10-year series of forecasts of their degree of climate knowledge to some extent, and also their interest in the science, also the challenges they've had in trying to do the climate stories. But you're right, trying to get that evaluation is very, very hard, especially on a subject like this. And he's tried a couple measures on that. So there was when I was a TV forecasters, of course, we were all so cocky that we thought, oh, everyone trusts us, right? We thought they all trust us. Well, we found out that some don't. And but in general, if they're watching a particular forecasters, that's the one they trust or like, or what Ed and Tony did in 2008, one of their survey questions for the 6 Americas survey was that, I think, do you trust your weather reporter? And we sort of scratched our heads, why are you using weather reporter? That's before I knew him. But that pointed out that the TV forecaster had a relatively high level of trust compared to its scientists, the military, and then down a few steps are TV forecasters in trust of science information. In some of the NSF surveys, they're survey every 2 years, follow the Pew surveys and what have you, compared to news media or journalists or politicians. And so there was, there is that trust level there. And that's one of the things that they've continued asking in the surveys. How much trust do you have in your TV forecasters? So we don't have a direct one-to-one answer to your question, but we have some indicators that it encourages us to keep doing this thing. Well, I might throw out one of the things that NASA's always had a challenge with is when people, the trust in NASA is extremely high, as you might guess. And NOAA's would be too, but it's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And by the time you say that, people have sort of, okay, not us, but public in general. But one of the things that we did a survey specifically, Ed did, about what's your trust in the NASA website and NASA doing climate science. A lot of people said, I didn't know they did climate science. I thought they just sent men to the moon, off to Mars and Jupiter. And so one of the things that's developed over this, I've been sending out basically weekly emails for the past 10 years about NASA science, climate science specifically. One of the things that's evolved with these messages is that at least our TV forecasters know that, oh, NASA is heavily involved in looking down at Earth and not just looking up at space. So that's been one of the positives about a side effect or broader effect.
Just out of curiosity, for those from the academic side, how many of you have used like local news networks as a potential dissemination point of information out to the public? Has that been a thought before?
There's for the CLIMAS program, that's kind of a strategy. I think it depends on, so it's certain investigators kind of have these relationships with, there's one in particular here in Tucson who's just does science reporting or climate reporting. And I know he looks to our CLIMAS Twitter and then the Twitters of a handful of researchers who are active on there. And I think part of what, and then we have a podcast where people listen to it and they're like, oh, here's an interesting thing that I might write about. And so actually finding those partnerships with a science writer has been really useful, I think, at least here in Tucson.
Okay, that's good to hear. Like I say, we have Amber Sullins in Phoenix, who is really one of the champions of covering climate change. And again, once again, a lot of her segments are just 30 seconds long, but I wouldn't doubt a bit that she's done something wrong. And one of the challenges that TV forecasters have is that, especially now when they're doing social media and doing forecasts and visiting schools, their time is booked up. And so to ask them to take a cameraman, it's hard to get a crew and go out and go across town and sit down with the university professor about his latest science is just way too time consuming. But one of the great things now with Zoom is, they can sit down at their desk and, hey, tell me, Gigi, tell me more about what's going on and what visuals do you have that might go with the story. So again, TV local news ranges from short little snippets, sound bites basically, to, here's a point. When Nixon was president, the average soundbite was 45 seconds, but now the average soundbite is less than 7 seconds. And so that's how we have to get science in there sometimes, just with a soundbite.
That's about how much it takes to read a tweet, right?
That's it. Yeah.
That's our attention span.
That's what we're competing with.
Yeah, just in the interest of time, I know everybody has time is valuable, so we are coming close to the hour. We can hang out and chat more if people want to, but thank you for coming and talking. Thanks thank you, Joe and Gigi and Allison, for all of your fantastic information and resources. I think this is all great. I love all the information on climate research and getting it out, especially from where I live to the farmers. While I'm not directly affected, that's where I live. So always interesting to me. I do want to point out our next office hours. We do have one coming up in November, on November 10th. We don't have information on the website yet because we usually don't put it on until this one's over. So you guys are hearing it first. But Jory is actually going to be one of the speakers, and it's going to be on science mis and disinformation and broader impacts. So very relevant to a lot of the stuff that's happened in the last 2 years, I think, with information being skewed and how to combat that. So
I will say climate science, climate change is one of the original disinformation campaigns.
yes,
That's
I
right.
had I have a master's in public administration, and it came from a business college, and I had an advertising professor once tell me that he told the class, he absolutely did not believe that climate change was real. And this was in like 2010, like it wasn't like real long ago. And I was like, okay, now I'm gonna take anything you say with about that much salt
That's right.
and just try and pass the class and get out of here. Because that's it. Yeah, that's my story.
The podcast Drilled is a really, really interesting history of the whole climate disinformation, how all that happened, all the, documents from the corporations and scientists who helped do that, and so I think that's the other side of impacts of science is they can often be used and in harmful ways. So, and that was also true of climate. So.
Oh, yes, right. Disinformation is just horrendous. And another website is Skeptical Science with John Cook, who worked with George Mason University. Has some good arguments on how to counter some of the disinformation myths. So some good sources out there. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you in November.
All right, sure.
Bye.